welcome back to Adventures with Ariel. The Disney and Pixar rivalry continues with part 2. If you haven't seen part 1, make sure to click that card right up there to watch that first. Otherwise, keep watching to find out how Disney took Pixar's throne as the top dog in animation. In 2005, Bob Iger succeeded Michael Eisner as the CEO of Disney. At this point in time, Pixar had recently announced that they were going to pursue other distributors besides Disney for their future films. Shortly after he became CEO, Bob Iger had a revelation at the opening ceremony of Hong Kong Disneyland. He observed that most of the characters in the parade were from Pixar movies, and therefore realized that Disney needed Pixar more than Pixar needed them. So Bob offered up a solution in the form of a radical proposal. Disney would buy Pixar. Pixar's co-founders Ed Catmull and John Lasseter were hesitant to oblige, but the company's chairman, Steve Jobs, who had met with Iger previously through his work at Apple, convinced them to give Iger a chance. Lasseter spoke with Iger, and in turn realized that Iger's intentions were sincere. Walt Disney Animation had hit a slump, and they needed Pixar to help fix it. So in early 2006, Disney bought Pixar for $7.4 billion. John Lasseter became the chief creative officer of both Pixar and Walt Disney Animation, while Ed Catmull became president of both studios. The two were originally encouraged to replace Disney's broken animation department with Pixar, but Catmull and Lasseter decided to revive it instead. Meanwhile, Pixar would remain a separate entity within Disney. It would keep its own separate building, personnel, and policies. The two animation studios would also not be allowed to share ideas or resources in order to maintain their independence from one another. Walt Disney Animation eagerly anticipated John Lasseter's plans to turn their broken studio into one of Pixar's level. At the time, Disney was putting out one flop after another. Critically panned films like Home on the Range and Chicken Little just weren't going to cut it anymore. So Lasseter borrowed a page from Pixar by opening lines of communication, empowering directors, and installing a story trust, akin to Pixar's famous brain trust of top directors, writers, and storyboard artists who collaboratively drive a film's story forward. Disney animator Tom Sito is quoted with saying that Disney's creative environment before the Pixar takeover had a lot of executives interfering in the creative process. Lasseter swept that all away. Before long, Disney entered what many now consider to be a revival. In other words, they returned to being the top dog in animation, a similar spot to where they were in their 1990s Renaissance period. It all began with 2010's Tangled, which upon its release became the biggest commercial and financial success that the company had seen in years. And then there was 2013's Frozen, a film that was declared by many as an instant classic, with a level of quality not seen since 1994's The Lion King. It surpassed Pixar's Toy Story 3 to become the highest grossing animated film of all time. It made $1.27 billion worldwide and received 2 Oscars, Disney's first for Best Animated Feature, which had been in existence for 13 years up to that point, and Best Original Song for Let It Go. The films that followed Frozen would continue Disney's upward trend in movie quality, bringing audiences more classics like Big Hero 6, Zootopia, and Moana. Needless to say, Lasseter's and Catmull's complete overhaul was no doubt responsible for the turnaround of Walt Disney Animation Studios. Pixar employees were highly aware of how much time Lasseter was spending at Disney's animation studio, with some referring to Disney as the new girlfriend, whereas Pixar was the wife. One source says that Lasseter, who was coming off the personal disappointment of Cars 2, was more invested in Disney's turnaround than in Pixar. Ah yes, Cars 2, the first Pixar film to be critically panned and receive a rotten score on Rotten Tomatoes. In 2011, Cars 2 was released and was the beginning of what many consider to be the Pixar slump. 2010's Toy Story 3 did exceedingly well, both critically and financially, and served as a satisfying conclusion to the much-beloved Toy Story franchise, or so we thought. The sequels that followed, however, would fail to come anywhere close to the high bar set by Toy Story 3. These included the likes of Cars 2 and 3, Monsters University, Finding Dory, the list goes on. These films did great financially, no doubt, but many fans and critics felt they were unnecessary and lacked any thematic or emotional emotional connection to the films that spawned them. And interestingly enough, if we look at Pixar's library of films from the years 1995 to 2009, we only see one sequel. That's 14 years of highly acclaimed original films and one sequel that the critics also loved. But upon the release of Toy Story 4, there will have been 7 sequels released in the last decade, many of which are considered to be mediocre. Pixar once prided itself as a company that didn't need sequels to keep itself afloat. Remember their outright rejection of the Circle 7 animation films? What happened, Pixar? Well, it turns out that they needed sequels more than we thought. Pixar executives say that it wasn't the Disney acquisition that caused the onset of sequelitis. Although unsurprisingly, Disney CEO Bob Iger is a big supporter of Pixar's sequel strategy and the box office it generates. But Pixar claims that they have long known that sequels would be necessary to stabilize its business. In his book, Creativity Inc., Ed Catmull calls sequels a sort of creative bankruptcy, but notes that the company had a long-term plan to eventually develop one sequel for every 2 original films. Currently, that doesn't seem to be the case, because in the last decade, Pixar has only created 4 original films. A few of these films have been pretty darn good. Films like Inside Out and Coco brought back that Pixar magic that audiences had been missing. But then there was Brave, Pixar's first fairy tale. The film has its fair share of fans, but it's generally considered to be below the studio's standards. In my opinion, Brave is nowhere near the level of Pixar classics like The Incredibles, Up, or Monsters, Inc. Another disappointment was 2015's The Good Dinosaur, Pixar's first flop. The film was a critical and box office dud, at least by Pixar standards. It made $332 million worldwide, which paled in comparison to the Pixar film released earlier that year. Pixar is in a really strange place right now. None of their recent films have been inherently bad. In fact, a few of them have become classics. But it's safe to say that the studio doesn't take the kind of risk that it used to, and their reputation has suffered because of it. I'm not just talking about their play-it-safe sequels either. Disney Animation has taken chances on outsiders like former TV director Rich Moore, who went on to direct Wreck-It Ralph and Zootopia, and screenwriter Jennifer Lee, who directed Frozen. Meanwhile, Pixar still heavily relies on those who have been with them for years, and has yet to produce any new all-stars as accomplished as Pete Docter or Andrew Stanton, both of whom are responsible for many of your favorite Pixar classics. But on the bright side of things, Disney Animation's comeback has inspired Pixar to challenge itself once again. One former Pixar employee says, quote, "It's like sibling rivalry. If a brother or sister goes out and does something awesome, you then want to go out and do something awesome." Pixar has also promised that there will be no more sequels released after Toy Story 4, and I hope they stick with that promise and bring back the kind of magical, creative Pixar storytelling that we know they're capable of. Disney, on the other hand, is about to release Frozen 2 just 1 year after Ralph breaks the internet, so maybe they're succumbing to a little sequelitis as well? Anyways, I see nothing wrong with a little friendly competition, and I wish both studios the best. Yeah, I'm just getting sick of all the sequels and remakes. I don't know, what do y'all think? How have the Pixar films of the 2010s compared to those in the 90s and 2000s? Do you think there's been a decline? Let me know in the comment section below. And if you learned something new from these videos, I encourage you to give this one a big thumbs up, as well as hit that subscribe button down below. Alright y'all, thank you so much for watching, and as always, have a magical day.